It seems that the World Economic Forum's regime in Canada, headed by Justin Trudeau, has defeated the truckers, which is deeply saddening, I think. I very much enjoyed the truckers' protest, but it seems it's been crushed by the heel of this new international order. So I thought it was worth going through and examining exactly how Trudeau has done this, because it's been a kind of a full spectrum attack on the truckers, and it's been very effective. And Trudeau definitely looks like the cat who got the cream. So we'll begin with the ideological attack on the truckers. Now, this actually took a while to get into motion. As you can see, this was only published a couple of days ago, and it's almost a month after the truckers began what they were doing. And so let's just go through it quickly, because I think it's important to understand their framing, because their framing is their justification for everything. So they say, during the truck convoy protests, we have watched banners demanding freedom, quote unquote, waving over big rigs parked in front of Parliament. But what does this vaunted freedom, quote unquote, actually mean? The answer is everything and nothing. It doesn't mean anything now. So it's a concept that's so inclusive, it includes nothing.
It's the critical race theory strategy.
Yeah.
Make the words mean nothing.
Exactly.
Obviously, that's not what it meant to the truckers, though.
Of course. And so when they say everything, it's the right not to wear masks in public places, the right not to be vaccinated, the right to hold Ottawa's downtown residents and businesses hostage, the right to malign public officials and call for the Prime Minister's death, the right to shout epithets at people of colour.
That was on the list of demands, was it?
I don't think it was.
I'd also love to say the M word. Just
yeah, the N-word passes for all. But the point, the first two are true. The first two are true. The other two are, the other three even are, of course, false. The right not to wear masks in public and the right not to be vaccinated. So they are definitive, reasonable demands that can be labelled under the category of freedom. But then it's nothing. Freedom is an empty word, unless you ask further questions. Freedom from what? Freedom to do what? And beyond that, where do my freedoms end and other freedoms begin? So the freedom of others begin. So it's like, no, it's actually not an empty word at all. And you don't need to ask further questions. And you have actually exactly laid out perfectly the truckers' position. We want to be free not to be oppressed by the government, is what the truckers' basic contention is. And in particular, not having to wear masks and the right not to be vaccinated. But then they go on. Freedom is not absolute. We live in a social matrix where one person's exercise of freedom may conflict with another person's exercise of freedom. Section 1 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms states this plainly. The Charter gives Canadians a bundle of rights and freedoms. Notice that framing. The Charter gives Canadians rights.
It's not how rights work.
Very French. It's not how English rights work, but this is Canada. I mean, our rights don't work that way either, but ideologically, that's not how rights work. But it prefaces them with caution. These rights and freedoms, precious as they are not absolute. The government, it claims, can limit freedoms provided the limits are reasonable and can be justified in a free and democratic society. And you can see how this is something that's just setting up a justification to simply take your freedoms away. Well, we justify it. We find it reasonable. We don't care if you don't find it reasonable. You don't even have the right to, protest or blockade or anything like that. We'll take that right away from you anyway. So it's all reasonable. So at the end of the day, anything they do could be given this cover at the end of the day. Anyway, throughout the never-ending pandemic, we have watched our governments, provincial and federal, struggle to draw lines on freedom in the right place, to echo the words of the Charter, to set limits that are reasonable and can be justified in a free and democratic society. Isn't that interesting? We've got a never-ending pandemic, and we can't even define where the reasonable line is. Okay, well then how can you draw it? Well, we're going to draw it anyway. Inevitably, some people disagree with where a particular government has drawn a particular limit and how long that limit should be maintained and how long it should be enforced. If we care about our democracy and common future together, we will submit to those limits in the short run and use elections and courts to hold government responsible in the long run. Right. So you've said, look, just deal with the never-ending tyranny for as long as we say so. And if we don't get voted out, that means we did nothing wrong. Why couldn't a southern slave owner use that same argument? Look, if you think slavery is unjust, just vote us out in the next election.
I'm sure the votes will work.
Yeah. It's just merely vote in the abolitionists in the South if you don't like slavery. It's how it works. The heady notion of freedom, defined as the unconstrained right to do what you want free of government limits, serves as a cloak for actions that harm women, men, and children who are simply going about their business and trying to do the right thing. Freedom without limits slides imperceptibly into freedom to say and do what you want about people who don't look or talk like you. You're racist. Freedom to be racist. That's what they mean. Sadly, the Ottawa Truckers Convoy has revealed this ugly side of freedom.
This is mad, because I mean, she started off with just, here's some straw man. I've painted a swastika on him.
Now you're a Nazi.
Isn't he ridiculous?
Yeah.
That's you, by the way. It's not.
Yeah. And so as we move forward from the pandemic into the future, we need to understand the true nature of freedom under our Constitution. So now we're redefining freedom. True freedom is, quote, freedom subject to reasonable limits that allow us to live together is essential to a peaceful and prosperous future for us all. Let's not allow the freedoms we cherish to become ugly freedoms.
Yes, so we have the right to protest, provided that no one is harmed or anything, and no one is. So what was
So
the problem?
but what this means is your view of freedom is now a false consciousness. They have defined true freedom that is truly in your interests.
Sure, but even their own definition doesn't actually rule out what happened with the protests.
No, not well. The truckers honking
Depends on what you mean reasonable, obviously.
Exactly.
But any actual reasonable person wouldn't go with what they're thinking.
And so that's exactly what they're arguing. And so true freedom is the freedom to be oppressed by the government and just deal with it for the next 5 years. That's what true freedom is. And of course, freedom is a colonial concept. So if we go to the next one, you can see how they're not really protesting for freedom. They're also racist. And Canada is a racist country. And so the concept of freedom is a racist concept. You see how this is all being justified. While the convoy supporters have characterized the protest as a peaceful movement, uninformed by politics, race, religion, or any personal beliefs, many supporters have been associated with or expressed racist, Islamophobic, and white supremacist views. But the concept of freedom itself is a white supremacist view, as this article explains. The convoy has surprised onlookers in the United States and Canada, because both the explicitly racist and violent perspectives of some of the organizers, and because the action seems to violate the norms of Canadian politeness. The convoy represents the extension of a strain of Canadian history that has long masked itself behind peacefulness or unity, settler colonialism. Colonialist, racist, Nazis who are violent. That's what those truckers are. It is not incidental to this latest expression of white supremacy, this is an expression of white supremacy now, is emerging amid a public health crisis. No, it's not incidental. It's directly responsible.
Point, you idiot.
The history of Canadian settler colonialism and public health demonstrates how both overt white supremacist claims and seemingly more inert nationalistic claims about unity and freedom both enable and erase ongoing harm to marginalized communities. So now the truckers are hurting Native Americans.
But it's so transparent. Like, they're just using marginalized communities as another shield, and I think to be thrown as the meat grinder.
Yes.
But just the freedom-orientated world view that you can have from the English and the settlers and the setting up of Canada and the United States and all that. That's all racist white supremacy. Therefore, anyone who insists on that worldview instead of a globalist worldview in which the elites tell you what to do are racist white supremacists, blah, blah, blah.
But they're also hating native Canadians, indigenous Canadians.
Yeah.
Amazing. So Canada, like the United States, of course, they go on to explain the settler colonial project, and that essentially this is just the painting of Canadian history.
Not wanting to be the CCP.
is intrinsically evil, right? And so Canadians become intrinsically bad themselves. And they give an example, sort of 1964, the Indian and Northern Health Services, directed by the Department of National Health and Welfare, increased the number of Indian hospitals, but these were segregated. And this was an expansion of the Canadian welfare state. So this is evil. Building Indians' hospitals is now bad, right? But the expansion of the welfare state thus perpetuated the project of colonialism. Welfare states are colonial. I like that.
I like where this is going.
Yeah. Allocating goods and services to certain residents while maintaining segregation and racial hierarchy. Ooh. The primarily white, capital W, white, supporters of the Freedom Convoy. So white as in a nationality now.
Politically white.
Yeah, politically white. That's what a Canadian is. The indigenous are not Canadians as far as they're concerned, right? When you capitalize white in this way, it becomes a political statement. But the capital white supporters, and again, this is the mainstream media. This is not like, this is what the alt-right have been begging for, is that they capitalize the W in white. But the white supporters of the Freedom Convoy argue the pandemic mandates infringe upon their constitutional rights to freedom. The notion of freedom was historically and remains intertwined with capital whiteness. You're a Nazi if you want freedom. How could you want freedom? That's settler colonialism. The belief that one's entitlement to freedom is a key component of white supremacy. Really? The Nazis were like, well, you know, people need freedom.
Look at what they're saying as well, though, which is you mentioned with the capital white being the alt-right thing.
Yeah.
Like, they're saying, if you want freedom and whatnot, you have to stand with the Nazis.
Yeah.
As if that makes any kind of sense. The white nationalist.
Nazis totally pro-freedom.
It's barbarically stupid.
Yeah, but that's where we are. This is what we've arrived at. This explains why the Freedom Convoy members see themselves as entitled to freedom, no matter the public health consequences to those around them. Now, of course, there's no public health consequence now because the coronavirus has become endemic. But Canada's history of freedom, then, was founded in the unfreedom of Indigenous people. If there were 0 people in Canada, if it was an undiscovered land where not one human had stepped foot, there would still be this English notion of freedom that arrived with the English colonists. So it is not founded on the unfreedom of Indigenous people.
I mean, many of these areas, there were 0 people.
Yes, that's true. But this is a demonstrably untrue statement, but this is how it's framed. If you want freedom, you are enslaving Indigenous people. That's what she's saying.
You insist?
It's mad, isn't it? They are advancing a settler colonial genealogy that deploys the language of freedom and unity while engaging in actions that are harmful and violent, says Taylor Dysart, a PhD candidate at the Department of History and Sociology of Science at the University of Pennsylvania. Thanks, foreigner, with your foreign ideology from America. Come over and explains how the Canadians are actually a bunch of Nazis whose very notion of freedom intrinsically oppresses Native Americans. Very cool, very relevant. But these people are on the internet a lot. And this line of thought, if you think, well, this is just 2 articles, no, this line of thought gets all the way to the Canadian Parliament, where we get to hear that honk honk is an acronym for Heil Hitler. Let's play the clip.
How many guns need to be seized? How much vitriol do we have to see of honk honk, which is an acronym for Hail Hitler, do we need to see by these protesters on social media?
Mm-hmm. What?
They've lost their minds.
They've spent a lot of time on 4chan.
Yeah, they really have lost their bloody minds.
I mean, that was a meme that was on 4chan, but of course this is contained to 4chan. Nobody in reality thinks honking of horns is a Heil Hitler meme. Anyway, so now we have defined freedom as government-defined authoritarianism and the truckers as Nazis. Let's take a look at what has happened. How did Trudeau treat the truckers? Well, he had not once attempted to reason with the truckers or accept that his policy was to blame. He just came out and called them racists, right? He identified them as the enemy. The racists, the white supremacists, the Nazis, these are all the same thing. The truckers were put instantly into the enemy category. And he literally said, I support Black Lives Matter protests because I support Black Lives Matter. I don't support this protest because this is white supremacy or something along those lines. And so it's not the act of protesting that he supports, it is the cause he supports. And of course, if you're supporting the wrong cause, he doesn't support your right to protest, which is why he's done what he's done. And so on the 17th of February...
Also, if the Prime Minister of the bloody country supports you, you don't need to protest.
Yeah, what are you protesting when all the institutions are on your side?
The protest is to
object to the
against
government.
the power structure.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, on the 17th of February, they began freezing accounts. So Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and said that the financial institutions had moved quickly to freeze the accounts of people linked to the demonstrations in Ottawa, leaving an unknown number of protesters in financial limbo. And she vowed to continue doing this until they... to starve the organisers of funds they needed to continue their occupation of the nation's capital. And then, of course, we covered how after that, Trudeau's terror troopers moved in and just started beating people, clearing the truckers out by force. Nameless, unidentifiable foot soldiers of the regime beat and trampled and shot people with rubber bullets and tear gas and things like that. People were arrested, bank accounts frozen, and journalists were beaten as well. Incidentally. So brilliant, you know, good to see.
I've seen some supposed liberals say this is all fine.
Yeah.
And I just think back to like the miners' strikes or like the petrol protests in which petrol like trucks would literally park outside the refineries and blockade them. Mm-hmm. And no one had their bank account taken away.
Mad. But the point is, the truckers have been pathologized as being evil Nazi racists by the power structure, and then violence is done to them by it. By, again, these anonymous, unaccountable, And again, beating journalists, like there are at least two, and they said to the journalists, we can't guarantee your safety. Like, this is mad. And of course, they arrested the convoy leaders, which is, as Jack Sobiech pointed out, this was one of the organizers that was under arrest. What a surprise. And so what's happened now that the truckers have been cleared out of Ottawa? Well, you would think that life would go back to normal, but you would be wrong. For some reason, Justin Trudeau has turned Ottawa into a police state, literally with checkpoints around. As you can see the Ottawa police here, there are approximately 100 police checkpoints surrounding the secured downtown area. Police will simply ask your reason for travelling within the area, and if they don't like it, what then? I suppose you're turned away, as we saw, in fact, previously.
I want to go for a walk. Not good enough.
Yeah, no. Go away. This is mad. We can go to the next one. There's, again, multiple reports of this. Randy Hillier is a member of the provincial parliament for Lanark, Frontenac and Kingston. The people of Ottawa in Ottawa are now living in an occupied zone under siege by the police state of Justin Trudeau. They must seek permission to walk or drive on the streets. They must prove their travel is warranted and necessary. Police have closed businesses without compensation. Mad. It's turned into like a little Soviet zone.
I mean, your cyberpunk dystopia memes are becoming more and more true.
It absolutely is. And so the blockade is lifted, but apparently the situation is not over. According to Justin Trudeau, the blockade's lifted, but the state of emergency is not over. Well, what was the emergency other than the blockades, Mr. Trudeau? Anyway, so this was all done without legal authority. And so Justin Trudeau's government has presented the Emergencies Act that they wanted to be passed in order to legalise retrospectively their actions. And at the moment, Trudeau and the NDP, the two power brokers, the Liberals and the NDP, I'm not an expert on Canadian politics, but I asked Dev about this and he was explaining, look, they've got this power block that is holding the rest in check because for some reason Canadians vote for tyranny. But the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, said that his party will reluctantly support the vote on the Emergencies Act, which meant it would expect it to go through. Why would you reluctantly support this, new emergency procedure where the government can just literally start freezing people's money and freezing their bank accounts? Why would you support that?
Because I'm a real liberal.
Exactly, because these aren't liberals, these are socialists. But he said it was a failure of leadership to take the threat seriously. And in response to the failure of leadership, he will allow the government to gain more power by putting in place the Emergencies Act. And he said he would support the act to target the financing of the convoy, a serious threat to Canadians, the citizens of the city of Ottawa, and the threat to democracy that they posed. Remember, the racist Canadians pose a threat to democracy, according to minions of the World Economic Forum. The NDP voters, however, are not in favour of this, and this has put their party into crisis. MPs know that their voters oppose these emergency measures and support the workers' choice, but it didn't matter, and it went through anyway. But anyway, people even went out and started protesting the NDP's headquarters, because why wouldn't you? Like, if you can go to the next one, John, the NDP voters were protesting the NDP's headquarters, where you can see Jagmeet Singh's...
people sitting outside honking, presumably?
Yeah. Those Nazis. And so after all of this, Trudeau was just like, well, look, the MPs, there were lots of debates in the Parliament, and they have a Senate as well, and this was held up in the Senate somewhat, but we'll get to that in a minute, in fact. But he came out and said, well, it's like the MPs don't trust the government. Why would they? Even go to the next one, John. Trudeau says that the MPs who vote against the Emergency Act indicate that they don't trust the government to make incredibly momentous and important decisions.
Yes!
That's exactly right. You're not a trustworthy person.
We've been through this.
The entire English-speaking world's political traditions are founded on distrust of government. Cuban?
Like, if not the last century, at least, just of lessons.
But it's mad, isn't it? It's absolutely mad. But anyway, like I said, this went through Parliament. Parliament approved Trudeau's Enabling Act. The resulting vote was 185 in favour to 151 against. Only 151 don't trust Justin Trudeau.
181 trust the government to do anything.
185. Trust them with these remarkable, extraordinary powers. And of course, these votes were split along party lines, with Liberals and NDP voting in favour and the rest voting against, the Conservatives and Bloc Québécois and all this. And so retroactively, this legitimises Trudeau's actions. He's invoked emergencies. He's done nothing wrong legally. And so anyway, during this, 206 bank accounts were frozen. As the Guardian reports, and Jordan Peterson says that miserable rag. Yep, 206 people's lives ruined without trial. Mad. This is just, why don't you trust the government?
Again, like we've had kind of protests in the UK with the petrol protests, and people didn't get their bank accounts frozen. This is entirely a new thing, that we just target people protesting on the basis that we don't like them.
Oh, and that's exactly what it is.
We're allowed to do it because they're Nazis, as you say.
Exactly, and that's exactly what it was. And so the government, was it Trudeau's deputy, Christine, I can't remember her name, Freeland. If you can go to the next one, John, literally just says, well, look, if you want to get your accounts unfrozen, you've got to stop protesting the government. We're literally going to hold your money ransom while you do something that opposes us. And I love this. Just pause and think about the implications of a Western government telling its citizens the only way their bank accounts will be unfrozen is if they stop protesting the government. That is mad levels of tyranny right there. And the Conservatives, of course, were effing useless. All they had to say is, well, I mean, just make sure that you're actually, verifying the people that you're talking about. But when you're opposing this in the Parliament, saying, well, I spoke to this person and she said she had her bank account frozen, and just make sure it's the right one. It's like, dude, you look like you've been taken over by a bunch of Nazis. I hate to say it. What are you doing?
When the Chinese do this, we complain. When Canada does it, they're saving democracy.
Exactly. It's like, do you really have nothing? I mean, why aren't you joining the truckers? Like, why didn't every single one of you go out and form a human line around the truckers as the Gestapo started advancing to beat the crap out of them or trample them with horses? But you're sitting in the Parliament going, well, I mean, at least I've double checked. I've got her surname, so I know it's the right person. Oh, shut up. But anyway, so after this, right, Trudeau has ruthlessly declared the truckers to be his enemies of the state, no less, enemies of democracy. He has sent in the military, or whatever the paramilitary nameless troops, I don't even know what we're supposed to call them, the terror troopers, have gone in, cracked skulls, beaten journalists, trampled old ladies, physically removed the truckers and ruined their financial prospects. He then calmly ends the emergency. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. He's revoking the use of the Emergencies Act because he says, quote, the situation is no longer an emergency. Well, it's not if you literally crack skulls. Once they've been literally pacified, of course it's not an emergency. This is a battle you've won.
I saw a lot of people saying it's him realizing he's buggered up, but
I'll get to that in a second. We are confident that existing laws and bylaws are now sufficient to keep people safe. MPs in the House of Commons voted to affirm the use of the Act on Monday, and the Senate was in the midst of debating the Act on Wednesday, but he withdrew the motion shortly after Trudeau made this announcement. So he didn't even need permission for this from the other branches of the state, right? And that's the point. Trudeau has moved very quickly here, and yeah, this doubtless would have been politically untenable, right? But he didn't need to wait. The governmental machinery was too slow to keep up with what he was doing. He got in there, he cracked skulls, he froze bank accounts, he went to post hoc retroactively legalize it, and before they even get to decide whether it was legal or not, the emergency is already over because he's already done the damn act. And so now he can just remove that and say, well, look, there's no emergency now, everything's fine, there's nothing left to debate, and he just looked awful, in my opinion. But it was unbelievably cunning, is how I would describe this. And so they've begun like unfreezing bank accounts. Look, the truckers are gone. We have physically removed them. The legality of it be damned. The next one, this is just the bank accounts just being unfrozen, and this went down to people literally. It's not impossible that someone who gave $20 could be captured and their bank account frozen, but I think that'll be rare. So that'll be rare. That's okay then.
No, it
won't. Yeah, exactly. But the point is they're beginning to unfreeze them now. So it's like, right, okay, protests over. Stop protesting this.
This will never happen again.
Oh, no, they don't say that. Right, and so Trudeau has turned Canada into a despotism that can be turned on and off like a tap. There's no reason he can't do this again. If the government feels like it, it can declare the opposition to the government to be settler colonialism and racism, take immediate and violent action, economically lock the citizenry, post facto legalize its actions, and then turn them off again after the protests are crushed and say that everything is hunky-dory and you should just trust the government. This is the pretense of a free society. This is a grinning cat wearing the skin suit of a mouse. It's moving too quickly for the machinery of government to catch up, and he has outfoxed them all. Now, I doubt this is going to help him come the next election. Like, I don't think people are going to forget what has been done here. Yeah, I mean, and if it hasn't, then there's something wrong with Canadians. But let's have a quick watch of how, and watch his mannerisms, watch how he's talking, watch the fact that he can barely contain his smile. Let's go.
In a democracy, you can protest. You can share your opinion at the top of your lungs. You can disagree with elected officials. You can certainly disagree with me. But you can't harass your fellow citizens who disagree with you. You can't hold a city hostage. You can't block a critical trade corridor and deprive people of their jobs. You can't attack journalists for reporting, which is essential to our democracy.
Yeah.
What you can do is vote. What you can do is run for office. That's how change happens in a democracy.
Okay, so start with Canada has hate speech laws that he supports, so you can't do that. You what was the second thing? You can't blockade a city. You can't shut down the country. Well, he did that with the lockdowns. You can't harass your fellow citizens, but he does all of these.
Can't attack journalists.
Can't attack journalists.
Although I can't guarantee their safety.
Yeah, I mean he has. We know we can name the journalists that his forces
Rebel
have
news
attacked.
lady who got shot with rubber bullets or whatever.
Exactly. Right. So he has done all of those things, and he's saying you can't do all of those things. You can't shut down the country, can't say naughty things, and you can't harass or beat journalists. So sorry, you've done all of that, right? And then he's like, okay, so what can you do? Vote. Well, no vote was offered on this. The Canadians did not vote on lockdowns. You know, there was no referendum. They haven't had an election since 2019, I think it was. You know, there was no vote on this. And so there's nothing that the Canadians could have done to prevent what Justin Trudeau's done. And what he's saying is this is an elective dictatorship. Every 5 years, you might get to change the dictator. But until that election comes around, you have no power and no rights. He has won here, and the Canadians have lost. And so then we pivot very slightly to this full-on invasion of Ukraine. This is just Marco Rubio, because this was all happening very, very rapidly this morning.
But it's still happening.
It's still happening right now as we record. But there's a full-on invasion of Ukraine going on. And so Justin Trudeau has to come out and make a statement about this. And let's just watch his statement, because it's incredible.
Canada and our allies will defend democracy. We are taking these actions today to stand against authoritarianism. The people of Ukraine, like all people, must be free to determine their own future. We will continue working with our international partners to safeguard Ukraine's territorial integrity and prevent further Russian aggression.
Freedom's settler colonialism, Justin. Didn't know if you got the memo or something, but like, why are we in favor of freedom all of a sudden? You say authoritarianism? Really? I mean, it's just the absolute gall.
I mean, everyone saw the different accounts as well. The Canadian government accounts being like, we need to bash down the truckers, but I stand with freedom in Cuba. It's like, funny you bring up Cuba. But also, the lady in the back there, did you see? I don't know what
she's so weird. She does this in every press
she's
conference.
sitting in the background while he's spouting crap, and she's like...
She's twitching like a lunatic. It's weird.
Fat boy behind the bully who's like, yeah.
But I don't even know. I think there's something wrong with it, to be honest. Because it doesn't seem natural, does it? But yeah, the gall of him to be able to come out and say this.
If you enjoyed that section from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to subscribe to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as some of the videos we do, this one being the one I did on the mother of all parliaments, the British Parliament being, of course, the origin of a third of the planet's parliaments. But if you'd like to follow me as well, you can also follow on Getter at Callum on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.